Welcome to Women in Music and Arts. This is your host, Sandy Kastel, and we are broadcasting live from Las Vegas every Wednesday at noon on KLAV AM 1230 and streaming online at klav.com. Our show today is sponsored by members of Women in Music and Arts, empowering artists of all ages through education and mentorship. You can find out more about Women in Music and Arts by going to our website at womeninmusicandarts.com. My guests today are both authors. Joining us in a few minutes by phone is America's most loved artist, Randy Riccoboni, and author of The Big Picture, Unleash Your Creativity and Profit from Your Passion. But in the studio with us today is international activist, advocate, and author Gabriella van Rij, author of With All My Might, Losing Fear, Finding Self. Hello, Gabriella.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's so good to have you. We've already started. I mean, when we were in the green room, we were having a great conversation already.
Yes, we were.
Just to give us a little bit of idea about who you are and where you're from and how you decided to write this book.
I decided to write the book because my story is unique, but the emotions that are behind the story actually touch a lot of people today still. I think I touch upon a lot of social issues, all the way from bullying to racism to how you get totally treated differently again after 9/11. And so a lot of the things make us feel totally isolated. And my book is basically With All My Might, and it's about self-acceptance, learning that road towards accepting who you are and what you are and being actually proud of it.
Mm-hmm. And even though you're working with children a lot to help them deal with being bullied, it also affects adults of all ages.
Oh, it affects everyone.
Yeah.
We always concentrate on children at the moment, especially because I think the suicide rates have gone up tremendously, and that's why we concentrate on it, and we need to. I mean, there needs to be awareness. But I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, and beautiful place. It rains too much, but one of the things that I find is we're still not the melting pot we're supposed to be. So you have a lot of people that come into Canada and then find jobs, and they actually get a lot of harassment in the jobs.
Even though it seems like it's a melting pot up there.
It's on the surface, it always looks good.
Right.
But then when you start digging a little bit, everyone stays within their corner. Mm-hmm. And I think this is not just for Canada. If you look at what's happening in the world today, whether it's Germany, whether it's the United States, whether it's Holland, mm-hmm. they're all having troubles in this area.
Well, I agree with you. I think even in New York, L.A., in different cities, you do have communities that, in Las Vegas, we have the same thing. You have communities where people seem to congregate that are in a certain culture. But part of that is due to having familiar foods.
Yes. And I'm not saying that it's a problem that you like to stay within your ethnicity.
Right.
But when there is such a fear-based of the other person,
right,
that's a problem, because then bullying and racism comes back to the foreground. Mm-hmm. And I get a lot of Google alerts through Travis, and I can tell you, they're horrendous stories, one by one. Mm-hmm. And it shouldn't be happening in 2012.
No, it shouldn't. But you're in Las Vegas for a particular reason this week, aren't you?
I am. I'm in Las Vegas for an adoption association here with the Clark County. And on Saturday at 6 p.m., mm-hmm. where I will be having the possibility to talk to parents that have adopted children. Mm-hmm. And I get a chance to speak to the adoptees, because the struggle for them in where do they belong in the scheme of things is really important. And I think we miss often talking to them and talking to them together.
And also you talk about when children of different races are adopted by
interracial adoption
relationships. Yes.
I heard the other day, I was at a book club, and mm-hmm. someone in Utah adopted 2 Black American children. Mm-hmm. Now, in a tiny little village somewhere within Utah, they're not thinking ahead how this is going to affect these children. And these are things that I would like parents. I think it's great to adopt, mm-hmm. but I think you also need to understand what you're doing to that child. Because in my case, coming from Pakistan and then suddenly having to live in the Netherlands where everyone was blonde and blue-eyed is a shock.
You stood out a little.
Yes. Total outcast. But I think standing out is not the problem. The problem is, where do you fit in?
Right.
And children and I think adults too, we desperately want to fit in. Whereas bullying, if you look at it, it's because of your uniqueness that you get bullied or picked upon. So in my case, I got picked upon because everyone said, who is she?
Right. And you mentioned before that your parents had a difficult time totally understanding it because they were a different color.
Totally. So my parents could not relate. So one of the things that I've never done, and I think many, many children do this, by the way, you can't tell your parents about the humiliation of the bullying. But I met a little boy at the middle school in Phoenix, and he asked me a question. After school, they come to me, right? I speak to them. And this boy actually really touched my heart because he said he was Asian from Korea. And he said, when will they stop teasing me about my eyes? Wow. And I looked at him and I said, when they understand, and they never will. And he then, it's like the boy, you saw him think, and it was like he had an epiphany. And he said, but I'm better off than you. And I thought, wow, it's a little squirt. And I'm like, okay. Come again?
Said, why?
Yeah. And he goes, because when I go home, I love my mom. I love my dad. And they all look like me.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, he got it.
There's familiarity.
In that 1 second, he actually got what I'm trying to teach.
Right.
And he got it because he feels it at school. But then he goes home and he is able to talk about the bullying because he actually has a mother that understands that to a certain extent. I didn't have that. I could not go to my mom and talk about skin color because she does not know.
So you kept it inside?
Yes.
And then you dealt with it by how? How did you deal with that? I mean, did you find that you
I'm a pain.
that it came out in other ways?
I'm a person that loves to play. I love to communicate. And I think communication is my middle name. And so I couldn't understand, and I was not going to accept that people weren't going to play with me. And being called Four Eyes was just not good enough. So although in the book With All My Might, I don't go into all these details, the book is basically an introduction of who's Gabriella and what did it take to find her might? Whereas in the children's version, I really go into these details of what it was like to be teased day after day and what I did. And so one of the important lessons that I learned, even though it still astonishes me today, is they were scared of me. So the bully or the group is scared of the unknown.
That's right.
And if we could understand that, if we could empower children to understand that, can you imagine that they would actually straighten their shoulders and have this attitude that's really positive?
Well, even as adults, I think we still, when we are, if somebody is aggressive towards us, a lot of times we do take it personally if we don't realize that is their stuff, it's not ours, and that's them acting out. And so it's good that you're going to teach children, or we're helping to teach children so that as they grow up, they understand how to deal with these things, not only in school, but as they go on to high school and college and in the real world. Working.
And I also have heard, and that saddens me a lot, that a lot of victims of bullying become actually bullies later in life. And that's saddening because they know firsthand how tough it was. So as adults, they shouldn't do that. But again, it's because nobody dealt with it with them. So I think it's really important to both treat the children and the adults.
Is that why you've decided to write a children's book too?
The children's book comes out of, honestly, when you suddenly realize that you are a role model to them and that they can relate to every ethnicity, whether you're from South America, whether you're from the Middle East. I seem to have this look, which you can't see on the radio, but I seem to have this look that kind of blends in no matter which culture it is, except the Dutch, obviously.
Yes.
So if you look at that, for those children, they can relate. And I realized the importance of that. I realized that although I suffered being Pakistani and Dutch and not knowing where I belonged, that this is such an important message, and to get it out in a children's version. The only thing I can honestly say, it's much harder to write the children's version because I really want them to understand how painful it was.
Right.
And the only way to do that is to dig deep and go there.
Right.
And that's tough.